Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 87, Seeking Reason. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the short story, The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
New in the writing world, I think I'm done messing around with edits for my story for now. So I'm planning to send that off today to my editor. Yeah, then that'll kick off another round of edits. Hopefully much smaller edits than what I've been doing. But yeah, should be good to go today. I think I just get to a point where I'm like, okay, I don't know. You could keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, but at some point you just have to stop. And I think that's the point I'm at now.
I get that. So the editing that you have done outside of the editing that you have completed, is that copy editing or proofreading or line editing?
What I've done so far, I would say, is developmental editing.
Okay.
So, working on story elements and fleshing out character moments and descriptions and tone and style, all these sort of high level things.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm doing some copy editing, as I'm going through. I'll find some mistakes, I'll rework sentences, things like that. But that hasn't been the focus of this. When I hand it off to my editor, that's what she'll be doing. She'll be doing a copy edit.
Okay, that's what I meant. She's doing the copy editing, proofreading, etc.
Yeah. She'll be doing.
Okay.
Is it copy edit or line edit? I always get those confused. One of them. I think copy edit. I think she'll be doing copy edit, and she's pretty good. She kind of does a little bit of both, which is nice. And last time, at least, she did sort of a second pass after I'd made all my changes to make sure I didn't screw anything up or she didn't miss stuff. And then for me, I just used that as the proofread as well. I'm fairly detail oriented, so it's fairly clean. And I look it over enough to where I'm not too worried about it. Once I've gone through it, she's gone through it. Microsoft Word has gone through it. Pro Writing Aid has gone through it. I don't get a separate proofreader.
Right. That's so important to go through and do all of those going back and editing piece. And one of the things that I have noticed when I do the audiobooks, I do an audio edit, and then even after that, I go back and do the audiobook, and I will still find stuff. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. There's always going to be little things here and there.
Yeah. The other day, I found a a comma that should have been a period. Seriously?
Oh, yeah.
And it was technically, I think, not grammatically incorrect, but it was related to a dialogue tag.
Oh, okay.
But it's not consistent with the rest of the story. The rest of the story, I use periods before new dialogue tags. So, And that's what was frustrating to me. But it's such a little tiny little, when you think about it, instead of a dot, it's a dot with a hook.
Yes.
Buried amidst all the other characters that you're looking at. So I was like, go back, fix that. So, yeah.
The things that tend to get me are homophones, where it's like, I intended to write a specific word, but then my typing hands go into automatic mode and they type another word that's
Yes.
similar to that.
Yes.
And it's a valid word. It's not a spelling, and it works grammatically. It just doesn't make sense in the context of the sentence.
Right.
So those pop in every once in a while.
The one that I always get caught on is the word wave. There's W-A-V-E and there's W-A-I-V-E.
Yeah.
They're different.
Yeah.
So I actually will do a search.
Yeah, that's a
for
good
the
one.
ones that I know I always, because that's what my fingers will do. They'll go into the different word. So
yeah, the other one that I hit, the other thing I hit is, since we're talking about Poe, is rap. If I use RAP, if I want to use RAP, like you rap on the door,
right?
You rap your knuckles on the door, whatever. Then obviously it's RAP, but I almost always type WRAP just out of habit. I know the difference. It's just I just type it, and then hopefully someone finds that later.
Yeah. It's an ongoing. I don't want to say struggle, but it's an ongoing journey to be aware of those things and make sure.
The good thing is, if you have consistent ones like you were mentioning, and you note those, you can add it to your process to do, a global search and look for those specific things that you make mistakes with a lot.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, congratulations on finishing up that developmental edit and getting that off to your proofreading line editor. That's really exciting. That's a great step.
Yeah, thank you. I'm excited. So how are things going in your writing world?
They're going fine. I'm still working on the space station catastrophe and moving out of that to move into the next exciting adventures as the story continues in Meridian. And that's pretty much it.
Great. So, yeah. As long as you're making progress, that's good.
So as a reminder to our listeners, you can read The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard or The Tales of Zara, and they are available in multiple different platforms. For The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard, that is made available on Patreon as it's being written. So if someone's interested in seeing that story in draft, that and the other two books in The Adventures of the Empyrean Guard are available on Patreon. The Tales of Zara are available on Amazon as well as in paperback. So you can read the first book in The Tales of Zara on Amazon, on Kindle Unlimited, and as an ebook, and as a paperback on Amazon, and paperbacks through other bookstores. And you can read the second book in the series currently only on Kindle Vella. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right.
All of those links are available on our websites, and the links to our websites are in the show notes. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, and television?
Let's see, I've started Brandon Sanderson's YA story, Skyward.
Okay, how's that?
I'm really enjoying it so far. I don't know how far I'm in, maybe 25%. But it starts off really good. It goes very quickly. I can definitely see how his writing has progressed since some of his early books. I haven't read too much Sanderson. I have only read Mistborn and the Reckoners series. So this is my next step into his world. But I'm really liking it so far. It's about this girl whose father is like in the Air Force, essentially, on this planet. They've come there from Earth. It's a different world, and they're being attacked regularly by this other force, which is kind of vague right now at the start of the story. And she wants to become a pilot like he was, and so it's like her travails going through that. I don't want to give too much away for people reading it, but it's pretty cool. I'm enjoying it. What about you? Have you come across any cool stories?
As far as books are concerned, I am finishing up the third in the Timothy Zahn Star Wars series with Thrawn. I forget the title of the book, but I'm very close to the end. And I'm enjoying it. It's very, again, as I've said before, very Star Wars. It's comfortable. It feels very true to the universe that was created by the movies. And so, yeah, it's been an enjoyable read. The other thing that I have been enjoying is continuing to watch the series Agatha All Along, which is currently coming out on Disney once a week. I know you don't like that. You prefer to wait until the end and then binge it. And to be honest, I think that's a good idea because this is a good story and it's hard to wait for the next episode.
Yeah, good. I'm
So,
excited
yeah.
to watch it.
I'm really enjoying this, and there are some twists and turns that are completely unexpected. It's a journey story, and I think think it's safe to say that without giving anything away. So it's like, your group goes on a journey, and we've seen those before. You see that a lot in stories. It's a journey story, and so there tends to be sometimes in some of these journey stories some patterns of how the journey moves forward and how everything kind of plays out. Well, there are no patterns, and it's been very interesting to see how they have deviated from my expectations and how this is going.
Yeah. So, good.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that because the Zara series is, sort of journey type books. At least the first one more so than the second, but it definitely has the same feel.
I need to read your Zara books. I'm going to wait till the third one comes out. I'm going to be one of those annoying readers that waits till your series is finished.
Yeah. I think there's going to end up being 4. That's currently my plan.
Good. Well, are you ready to talk about the fall of the House of Usher?
Yeah, let's do it.
Poe-tober continues on the Stories Told podcast, as today we're talking about the story told in the short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. And I'm going to read a summary that I found online from University College at Oxford. The Fall of the House of Usher is a story about an unnamed narrator who is going to visit his ill friend, Roderick Usher. Roderick's twin sister, Madeline, is also ill with this unknown disease, and Roderick believes his house is sentient. Did you enjoy this short story?
Yeah, I'm mixed on this one. There are definitely aspects of it that I do enjoy, but for me, of the 3 pieces of Poe that we've read so far, I'd say I enjoyed this one the least, which we'll get to when we talk about what could be improved and kind of what the message was. But as far as things I did like, he's so good at being able to set a scene and create a mood. And I think this story does that extremely well, as we saw with his previous stories as well. I will say this was a bit of a challenging read for me, again, given just how writing has changed over the years, the decades. It took a while to get into. Kind of like the Pit and the Pendulum, right? Is a little bit chewy at the start. And, you kind of have to get into the rhythm of his writing. But that said, I can still appreciate the writing, and I think he does some things so well. And I love one thing I noted. I love how he exemplifies the opposite of common writing advice today, which is like, don't use adverbs, use adjectives sparingly, keep sentences simple, don't use semicolons. Like, there's all these things that people tell you as like rules for writing, and they're not rules. They're just, guidelines for modern day sensibilities. And even then, you can't take those things too seriously. And I always notice that when going back to earlier writings, such as Poe, where they didn't arbitrarily limit themselves to these fake guidelines that people made up. And I think it's richer as a result. I think sometimes our writing gets watered down in the modern era. So it's nice to go back to stories like this that really seep you into the world. Another thing was writing advice. So one writing advice element that we hear that he does do is you try to use active, highly targeted verbs rather than generic verbs or was or is. And he does that phenomenally well. His use of language is superb. He has great diction, and he's very evocative in his writing throughout. And this is just another example of that. So I did really very much appreciate that. I love the kind of sentient house idea, the sort of haunted / sentient. You're not quite sure what's going on there, and you're not quite sure of is there a supernatural nature to this until the end. Toward the end, I think you realize what's happening. But I like the way it unfolded. And there's a Netflix show called The Fall of the House of Usher, which is based off of this. Obviously, they take great liberties. They mix in other stories of his into that show. So, like the Raven and the Pit and the Pendulum, for example, the Cask of Amontillado, all those things, the Telltale Heart, all those things are in the TV show, The Fall of the House of Usher. So it kind of uses The Fall of the House of Usher as a sort of scaffolding for bringing in these other stories. But it's also surprisingly true to this story. I had never read this before. At least I don't remember it at all, so I don't think I did. So it was neat reading this after watching the show and seeing how there's connections there and there's overlaps. But yeah, I did like a lot of this, but it left me a little bit wanting at the end, and I didn't feel it was as strong as the previous two works of his that we read. So that's where I fall. What is your overall feeling about it, and what aspects of it did you like?
Well, this is actually one of my favorite of the Poe short stories because I love this idea of connecting the physical house with the family. And at the very beginning of the story, Poe describes, or the narrator describes, how the House of Usher is used to describe both the family and the line of the family through its ancestry and descendants, as well as the physical building. And I always thought that was just absolutely fascinating. And the other piece that I really enjoy is, and you kind of alluded to this with your discussion of just Poe's very precise and powerful use of language and the words that he selects and chooses to convey the ideas that he is trying to convey. It's a very lush feeling. And by lush, I don't mean like green, but like very thick and immersive in its sort of gothic, heavy atmosphere. There's just so many layers and so many details, and details that you actually, when you go back and look at the words, they may not actually really be there, but the visual that you get, you're filling in the gaps in your mind with the lush gothic details that he's evoking. One of the things that I think is fascinating about this is that this was written in, I think, 1839. And so 100 years later, William Faulkner was creating something called Southern Gothic, which had a very similar feel of old families, lots of details, lots of things that are not quite healthy and in the light, things that are in the darkness, family secrets, family inherited secrets. And then you get the same feeling from Anne Rice's stories about the Mayfair witches, which is a horror story. It's more along the lines of Poe than, say, Faulkner's stuff. So Faulkner takes sort of the family secrets piece that you find in The Fall of the House of Usher, and Anne Rice took the family secrets and the horror piece and recrafted something new. So it's almost like he created this idea. And I'm kind of wondering, because it also reminds me a little bit of Jane Eyre. And I'm wondering when Jane Eyre was written. And I don't really know anything. I mean, I'm not an expert in this particular kind of genre, right? You know more about the horror genre than I do. But it was Jane Eyre was published in 1847, so less than 10 years after The Fall of the House of Usher. So we have this sort of, I'd like to say sort of like almost a pedigree. And I don't know if The Fall of the House of Usher was truly the first that led to these other stories, that have very similar kind of feeling and ideas. But that's what it reminded me of. And I just think that is so creative, the way you can actually create an entirely new genre, if that's what he did, with this feeling. I think it's fascinating. Yeah. I also find that it's such a short story, and there's so few words, and yet the characters all feel very real. You have the narrator, who is our sympathetic eyes into this universe, but Roderick felt real, and Madeline felt real. We hardly heard from Madeline at all.
Yeah.
But she still felt real. I was just very impressed with that. I think it takes a lot of skill to create that much reality, that much accessibility in such a short amount of words. I think it's very talented.
One thing you said that got me thinking, you mentioned like how there's sort of this gothic feel to it. And wow, that seems so apt because it reminds me of Gothic architecture, right? It's like with the details and the sort of looming architecture and, gargoyles and things like this. And it's like, his writing definitely has that feel. It brings that to life in such a way that makes it feel like they're connected. So yeah, that's really cool. I didn't think about that until you just said that.
Yeah. We talked about what we liked about it, but you actually also indicated that this was not your favorite of the Poe works that we have looked at so far during Poe-tober. Tell me what you might have changed as an author.
Yeah, for me, I thought, and this again is coming from a very modern sensibility. I felt like it was a bit too wordy and the description was probably overdone. Certainly early on. Again, I know he's setting the scene and he's building this world in your mind, and he does an excellent job of that. But I could have just used with a little bit less. Like I said, it was a bit chewy and it was a bit much. And I'm just, we're so used to reading stories now where you just get right into it. But it is a short story and it's not that long, so it goes pretty quick. So I just would have tightened that up a little bit for me to get into it a little bit more quickly. And then the other thing I would have done, which is something that the TV show did, which is to give a more clear reason for what happens, right? For the events that unfold. The TV show actually does that quite well. Whereas here it's just left sort of vague unless I missed something. It's more about just this house, literally and metaphorically, has existed a long time and is sort of crumbling under its weight kind of thing. But there's nothing specifically that's noted that indicates why these events are happening now and what the source of that is from. So I would have added something to that effect. And I thought, like I said, I thought the show did that really well. So those are the things that I noted. Is there anything that you would improve?
I had the exact same note. It didn't make sense. I would have liked to, like you just said, had an explanation of what was going on, a little bit more of a concrete explanation. Now, it may have been in 1839 that you could go ahead and say, madness is the explanation, because they didn't have the understanding of mental health issues that we have now, or weak constitution, or some kind of unknown malady, because they didn't have, the modern medical understandings that we have now. But I still would have liked to have had a little bit more to explain what was going on, or maybe even just some more hints of what finally resulted in the end. And I think what I mean by that is like to have a few more setups that were paid off at the end. The biggest setup we got was, a zigzagging crack down the front of it that wasn't really seen, that then led to the destruction of the actual physical building at the end. But I think it would have been really cool to have some kind of evidence, like the housekeeper was cleaning up breaking pieces of stone that were falling off as the stone was disintegrating, past the housekeeper as she was sweeping up, chunks of stone that had fallen off from the interior wall. Something that kind of showed and mirrored the falling apart of Roderick and his sister. I think might have been just a little bit more of those setups to then give us that payoff at the end and make it make more sense. So, did you come up with any themes for the fall of the House of Usher?
Yeah, this was a tricky one, and I'm interested to hear what you came up with, because this is one of the reasons where it left me kind of wanting at the end, because I was kind of like, well, what was the point of this? So, because I struggled to find a theme for it, other than it just being kind of this creepy setup, and like you said, the descent into madness or whatever supernatural thing was plaguing them and their family. And it kind of ties into what I said and what you said, which is what's the cause of this, and why did it lead to this destruction of the metaphorical and literal house? What I came up with, and I don't know if this is remotely what was intended or accurate at all, but trying to read through what's happening, was greed and excess ultimately lead to decay and ruin.
Oh, I like that. Though I'm curious, because I didn't get a sense of greed and excess. So tell me did I miss that?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm kind of reading into it. Basically, you have this this huge house, this mansion there, right? And this family that stood the test of time, kind of like this old money. And He talks about like the vaulted ceilings and the windows so high you can't even reach them. Right? It's like it's all this very grand setting. And he kind of mentions like once upon a time, and now it's kind of, now it's kind of become this macabre thing, sort of falling apart, not maintained, decaying. So like I said, I kind of reading into it a bit, like maybe that was the message. Maybe, as you said, maybe it's something that would be more clear for readers of the time what he was going for and kind of what the setup for this was. Maybe it's a little harder for us now.
But I really like what you said about death and decay, because that is really a key, because I struggled with the theme on this as well. And I really like what you said about death and decay. But what I would maybe say, instead of greed in excess, because I agree, I think you have to kind of read into that in order to find it. But what if it's something along the lines of self-imposed isolation? This family has isolated itself from everyone else, from the community, from friends. It says at the beginning, he said at the beginning that he was Roderick Usher's only friend. So what if it's something more along the lines of, self-imposed isolation will lead to decay and death?
Yeah, that could be good.
I don't know.
It's like separating yourself from the world, something like that.
Yeah.
I could buy that.
I don't know. But I agree. I think it was really difficult to find one here, because you really couldn't see any lesson, at least, like, for example, for our narrator from the beginning to end, except if it was like, don't go visit your ill friends, which is not really a good theme, right?
Right.
So what do you take away as a writer from The Fall of the House of Usher?
Oh, I think it's the thing that I mentioned early on, which was don't be afraid to indulge a bit in setting a scene, play with that, have fun with that. Certainly for your early drafts, you can always trim that back later. But you have to keep in mind that it should be appropriate. One of the things that is tough to do is finding the balance with description and flow of the story. I think he gets away with it a little bit more here, because these are short stories where, he's, like you said, he's setting a Gothic scene. So he can sit down and take some time and build it a bit more than maybe some of our modern stories can do. But I think it's still fun to play with that every once in a while. So don't be afraid to try and, really sink into the world and get the reader into the place that you're trying to set your story in. What about you? What do you take away?
Mine is very similar. It's explore the feeling that you want to create through details, and just really sink deep into that exploration. And like you said, you can always edit out too many words, but take the time to really sink into the feeling that you're trying to create. Yeah, that I'm trying to create. So I actually did some quick research on Gothic fiction, and what came up, this is Google's AI overview. The first Gothic novel is generally considered to be The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, published in 1764. Other famous writers of Gothic fiction include Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne. I'm assuming they mean Hawthorne's story about young Goodman Brown. That was always kind of weird. Oscar Wilde, Bram Stoker, and Mary Shelley.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So it was quite a while before his stories.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the short story, The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as Poe-tober continues. We talk about the story told in the poem Annabel Lee and the movie Werewolf by Night. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.